The day Amara Okonkwo got married, her groom arrived at the church on a battered Okada scooter, and the entire guest list made up their minds about him before he dismounted. The scooter pulled up outside the church in Lekki at 10 minutes past 11, its engine making the particular sound of a machine that has been pushed past its natural lifespan by sheer stubbornness. The groom parked it himself, removed his helmet, straightened his simple dark suit, and walked toward the church entrance with the unhurried confidence of a man who had nowhere better to be. Behind him, lining the street in both directions, were the cars of the wedding guests. 3 Range Rovers, a G-Wagon belonging to the bride's eldest uncle, several Lexuses, a Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost that belonged to Chief Nwosu, the bride's father's oldest friend, who had driven it specifically because he believed a man's car communicated his seriousness to the world. The scooter communicated something very different. Auntie Ngozi, the bride's father's elder sister, who had appointed herself the family's chief arbiter of social standing some 15 years earlier and had never been challenged in the role, looked at the scooter, looked at the man dismounting from it, and said to the 3 women beside her, each word landing with surgical precision, "Is that the groom or the delivery man?" The laughter was immediate. The kind that arrives before people have decided whether it is kind. Inside the church, the bride's father, Chief Emmanuel Okonkwo, stood near the entrance in an agbada so heavily embroidered it could have stood up without him in it, and watched the young man walk toward him with an expression that combined the patience of a man who had lived long enough to see many things with the specific discomfort of a man seeing one thing he had not prepared for. He said nothing, but his jaw tightened in a way that his daughter Amara would have recognized immediately had she not been, or so everyone assumed, in the bridal room at the back of the church. The groom's name was Chukwemeka Obi. Everyone called him Emeka. He was 36 years old, and he had ridden the scooter to the church on purpose. This requires some explaining. Emeka Obi had grown up in Ajagunle, the part of Lagos that the rest of Lagos discusses with a mixture of sympathy and careful distance. He had grown up in a 2-room apartment with his mother, his 2 younger sisters, and the permanent background noise of a neighborhood that was always either surviving or celebrating, and often both at once. The walls were thin enough that he had done his secondary school homework to the sound of the neighbor's generator, and the woman 3 doors down who sang while she cooked every evening without fail. His mother's name was Mama Chioma. She had sold akara at the bus stop from 5 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon for 18 years. Fried bean cakes wrapped in newspaper, 20 naira each, 50 naira for the big ones, her hands quick and practiced, her accounting done entirely in her head. She had used the money, carefully and without complaint, to keep 3 children in school. She had never told them that there were mornings she did not eat so that the school fees could be paid on time. They found out years later, and only because a neighbor mentioned it in passing, not realizing the children did not already know. Emeka had watched his mother do this for 18 years and had arrived at the only conclusion available to a person paying close attention, that the world owed her something it had not yet delivered, and that until it did, he was going to have to arrange delivery himself. He had left Ajagunle at 22 with a first-class degree in computer science from the University of Lagos, a second-hand laptop he had bought in installments from an Ikeja computer village vendor who let him pay weekly, and the specific kind of hunger that comes not from deprivation, but from understanding exactly what deprivation costs the people you love. At 24, he had written the first version of Traxo's routing algorithm in a single room in Yaba, surviving on EBA and instant noodles, debugging code until 2 or 3 in the morning, sleeping 4 hours, waking up, and doing it again. The algorithm solved a specific problem, the gap between when a Lagos small business needed goods delivered and when the goods actually arrived, by mapping real-time Okada and tricycle routes against delivery windows in a way that the existing services had not thought to do. It was, in retrospect, obvious. Most good ideas are, in retrospect. At 26, he had the first version of the product running with 50 business customers in Lagos Island. At 28, 6 states. At 32, Traxo had expanded into Ghana, Kenya, and Ivory Coast, and attracted the attention of 2 international venture capital firms whose partners had been looking for exactly this kind of infrastructure play in West Africa without knowing what shape it would take until they saw it. At 34, after a funding round that had been covered in 3 business publications, and one general newspaper that had called Emeka the most important logistics entrepreneur of his generation, which he had found simultaneously gratifying and embarrassing. The company was valued at $1.4 billion. He had moved from Adjagunal to a quiet estate in Lekki. He had bought his mother a house in Suralere with a garden large enough for her to grow the vegetables she had always wanted to grow. He had paid his sisters through university and postgraduate programs and watched them both become the kinds of people his mother had always known they would become. He drove a clean, modest car to his office every morning. Nothing that announced itself. Nothing that required a second look, because he had grown up watching men in flashy cars make poor decisions and had concluded early that the car was the last thing he wanted to be known for. For his wedding morning, he had chosen the scooter. The scooter was not random. It was the same model of Okada that the riders in Adjagunal had used when he was 17, the year of his JAM examination, the year he could not afford a taxi fare on the morning that mattered most. He had chosen it for his wedding for two reasons. The first reason was the same one that drives anyone who arrives somewhere unexpected. He wanted the people who had already decided who he was to commit to that decision fully, in public, before they found out how wrong they were. The second reason was more personal, and it belonged to a morning 20 years earlier that he had never forgotten and had rarely spoken about. The morning of his JAM examination, the bus he normally took had broken down at the end of the street. He had no money for a taxi. The examination center was 40 minutes away. He had 45 minutes until the gates closed. A man named Malam Sool, who lived 2 compounds away and ran his Okada on the Adjagunal to Mile 2 route, had seen him standing at the corner looking at the broken-down bus with the expression of a 17-year-old who has just realized that something unfair is happening and has not yet decided what to do about it. Malam Sool had said, simply, "Where are you going?" Emeka had told him. Malam Sool had said get on. He had ridden Emeka to the examination center in 38 minutes, weaving through early morning Lagos traffic with the practiced efficiency of a man had spent years making time out of nothing. When they arrived, Emeka had tried to give him the 20 naira he had in his pocket, the only money he had. Malam Sool had refused it. He had said, "Go and pass." That was all. Emeka had passed with the highest score in his center. He had never forgotten the Okada, or Malam Sool, or the particular lesson that the most important people in your life are often the ones who ask for nothing in return for the thing that changes everything. He wanted the first image of his marriage to be true. Not impressive. True. He'd spent a decade building a company that moved things across 6 countries, and the thing he was most proud of was that the routing algorithm at its core had been inspired by the same Okada network that had carried him to his future at 17. He had never left Adjagunal. Not really. He had simply built something large enough that Adjagunal could come with him. The scooter was Adjagunal. He brought it to Lekki on his wedding morning because you should always know where you came from, and the people who matter should know it too. Now, before we return to the church steps and Auntie Ngozi's laughter, here is who Amara was. Because this story only fully makes sense when you understand what she had already chosen before the scooter arrived. Amara Okonkwo was 31 years old. She was the only daughter of Chief Emmanuel Okonkwo, which in a Lagos Igbo family of their standing meant she had grown up with a specific combination of enormous affection and enormous expectation that eldest daughters of successful men tend to receive. She had been educated at a private secondary school in Lagos, then sent to the United Kingdom for her undergraduate degree in economics, then brought home to work in her father's construction company, where she had spent 5 years learning the business with a thoroughness that had surprised everyone except herself. She was sharp, practical, socially fluent in the way of someone raised at the intersection of old Lagos money and new Lagos ambition, and almost entirely unimpressed by the performance of wealth, which she had grown up surrounded by, and had therefore had the opportunity to study at close range and conclude that it was mostly theater. She had met Emeka at a Lagos tech industry dinner 18 months before the wedding, where she had been the only person at her table who was not either a founder or an investor, and had therefore been paying attention to the room rather than to the conversations around her. Emeka had been at the next table. He had said something during a panel discussion that had made her laugh. A precise, dry observation about the gap between how African startups described their market size to investors and how they actually operated on the ground. and afterward she had introduced herself not because she found him attractive, though she had, but because anyone who said that particular thing in that particular room deserved to be known. They had talked for 40 minutes. He had not mentioned the company's valuation once. She had not asked. She had asked instead about where he grew up, what his mother was like, what he read, what problem he was most interested in solving that had nothing to do with logistics. He had answered all of these questions with the directness of someone who had been asked plenty of questions he did not find interesting and was refreshed by questions he did. He had asked for her number. She had given it and said, "You have 2 days before I assume you lost it." He had called the following morning, not because he was eager to perform eagerness. He was not that kind of man, and she would have noticed immediately if he were, but because he had genuinely not stopped thinking about the conversation, which had not happened to him at a Lagos tech dinner in years, and he had concluded that the only sensible response to something that did not happen in years was to act before it became a regret. They had talked on the phone for 90 minutes, which surprised both of them. He had told her more about Ajagunal in that 90 minutes than he had told most people in 15 years of Lagos social life. Not because he was performing vulnerability, but because she had asked about it directly, and without the particular Lagos politeness that was actually a form of not asking, and he had found that when someone asked directly he answered the same way. They had dated for 14 months before the engagement. During those 14 months, she had met his mother 4 times and understood immediately that Mama Chioma was the reason Emeka was who he was. Not the algorithm, not the funding, not the business instinct, but the woman who had fed a neighborhood for 18 years on a small budget and enormous will, and had produced a son who thought about what the world owed other people rather than what other people owed him. She had gone to her father after the engagement and told him plainly who Emeka was and what he had built. Chief Okonkwo had listened with the careful expression of a man doing arithmetic, and then he had asked the question that Lagos fathers of a certain generation always ask. But what is his family? Meaning not what had he built but where had he come from, and whether the coming was from somewhere respectable enough. Amara had told him exactly where he had come from, and watched her father's face move through several calculations simultaneously. The valuation was not nothing. It was, in fact, considerably more than Chief Okonkwo had accumulated through 40 years of careful construction work and property development, which was a fact that landed in the room between them without either of them naming it. But the origin was Ajagunal, and Ajagunal was a word that carried weight in Chief Okonkwo's Lagos. The weight of everything he had spent 4 decades building distance from. He had not started from Ajagunal himself. He had started from somewhere only slightly more comfortable in Anambra, and had arrived in Lagos at 25 with clear intentions. He understood the hunger. He simply had preferences about which table that hunger arrived at. His expression had shifted. Not to rejection. He was too careful a man for that, and the valuation was too large for that. But to the particular Lagos arithmetic of how a man's origins could be contextualized in the right company, which was its own kind of conditional acceptance. Auntie Ngozi had not been careful at all. Auntie Ngozi had said, directly and to Amara's face, that a man from Ajagunal marrying into the Okonkwo family was a category error that no amount of money could fully correct, because money could by the destination but not the origin, and origin was what people remembered. Amara had looked at her auntie and said, with the specific calm of someone who has decided what they think and does not require external confirmation, "I am marrying Emeka Obi. The date is set. You are invited." Auntie Ngozi had been quiet for a moment, which was, for Auntie Ngozi, a significant event. And then she had said she would attend, because family attended. But she had not said she would attend happily, and the distinction had been clear. The plan for the scooter had come from Emeka 3 weeks before the wedding. He had told Amara over dinner at their apartment in Lekki, and she had listened with the particular focus of a woman who was both completely in love and completely clear-eyed about what she was marrying into. When he finished explaining, she had said, "My father will think I have lost my mind." Emeka had said, "Your father already thinks that. This will simply give him a more vivid illustration." She had thought about it. Then she had said, "I want to be standing outside when you arrive." He had looked at her. He had said, "You don't have to do that." She had said, "I know I don't have to. I want to. I want them to see that I chose this." That the scooter is not something that happened to me. It is something I am standing beside. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "Then stand beside it." She had said, "I will." She had. Which was why, when the scooter pulled up outside the church, and Auntie Ngozi made her remark about the delivery man, something different was happening from what the guests expected. The laughter began. Auntie Ngozi's voice carried. The women beside her joined in. Chief Okonkwo went still. The teenagers reached for their phones. And then the bride appeared in the church doorway. She stood there for a moment, veil pinned back, bouquet in both hands, looking at the scene in front of her. The scooter, her groom straightening his jacket, the laughing women, her father's careful blankness. She had known this was coming. She had planned to be here for it. But there was something about the actual sight of it. Her auntie's open mouth, the sound of laughter that had not yet registered that she was watching, that made something settle very clearly inside her. She walked down the church steps and stood beside her groom. The laughter stopped. Not entirely. Not immediately. But it changed quality. From the easy laughter of people who feel safely superior to something more uncertain. The specific quiet of a crowd that has just realized the person they were laughing at knew they were laughing and chose to remain exactly where they were. Emeka looked at her. He said, quietly, "I thought you were going to wait inside." She said, "I changed my mind. I wanted them to see both of us arriving." He looked at her for a moment with the expression he had when she did things that confirmed something he had already decided. Then he offered her his arm, and they walked into the church together. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story is speaking to something in you, subscribe to Visa's Tales. You will not want to miss what happens next. The ceremony was conducted by Reverend Adebayo, a measured man who had known the Okonkwo family for 20 years and had developed a sophisticated understanding of their internal weather. He performed the vows with warm efficiency, moving at a pace that gave the congregation no time to settle into the tension that had followed the couple from the church steps. Auntie Ngozi sat in the third row with her arms folded. Chief Okonkwo sat in the front row with the careful blankness of a man who had decided to wait. The vows were exchanged. The couple was pronounced married. The applause that followed was somewhat less unanimous than wedding applause usually is. The reception was held at a venue in Victoria Island. Guests arrived, arranged themselves according to their understanding of their own importance, and began the Lagos wedding ritual of eating, drinking, forming opinions, and distributing those opinions selectively across the room. Emeka sat at the high table and smiled at people, and said the right things and introduced himself simply as Emeka, without elaboration, to everyone who approached. He watched the room with the specific patience of a man who knew what was coming and had decided to let it come in its own time. It came at 1:30. Amara's cousin Chidera, who had been on her phone since the reception started, bouncing between Lagos business news accounts with the dedication of someone who had been briefed on what to expect, found the notification she had been waiting for, and brought it to the high table with wide eyes. The notification was from a financial news account. The photograph showed a man in a dark suit dismounting from a battered scooter outside a Lagos church. The caption read, "Traxo founder Chukwemeka Obi arrives at his own wedding by Okada. Net worth, $1.4 billion. Because he can." The photograph had been taken by a photographer named Neka who had been hired specifically for this purpose. Positioned across the street before the scooter arrived, briefed on the exact image required, the agency's social media contacts already warm and waiting. The news moved through the reception the way current moves through water, invisibly at first, then all at once. Within 20 minutes, every table had seen the photograph. Within 30, the recalibration was visible in real time. People who had been quietly amused by the scooter were now loudly revising their amusement into admiration, with the practiced fluency of a Lagos social class that had spent its life knowing the difference between the two and was determined that everyone should know they had always known. A woman who had declined to be photographed near the couple an hour earlier was now engineering a position beside Emeka at the bar with the efficiency of someone who had assessed an opportunity and was acting before it closed. Auntie Ngozi heard it from her daughter Adiz, who was 24 and had the specific satisfaction of a young woman delivering news to a mother whose opinions she had been absorbing and managing for 2 decades. Adiz placed her phone on the table in front of her mother, the photograph and caption clearly visible, and said, with the careful neutrality of someone who had thought very hard about their tone, "Mummy, read this." Auntie Ngozi read it. She read the caption twice. She looked at the number once, then looked at it again as though the first reading might have been inaccurate. She looked up. Across the hall, Emeka was standing near the bar talking to a tall man in a quiet suit. The managing director, she would later learn, of one of the venture capital firms that had led Traxo's last funding round, who had come to the wedding not because he was close with the couple, but because Emeka had personally invited him, and he had said yes immediately, because men like Emeka Obi did not invite you to their wedding unless they intended you to be seen there. Auntie Ngozi had spent 15 years in the Okonkwo family social world. She understood power. She understood money. She understood what it looked like when it was in the room and when it was not. She put the phone down. She picked up her glass. She said nothing for a very long time, which was something entirely unprecedented in 15 years of family gatherings. Chief Okonkwo found Emeka near the cake table an hour into the reception. He stood beside him for a moment in the manner of a man arranging thoughts into an order he could inhabit comfortably. He said, "The scooter." Emeka said, "Sir." Chief Okonkwo said, "You rode a scooter to your own wedding. You, who could have come in anything." Emeka said, "Yes, sir. I came in the vehicle that represents where I am from, not where I have arrived. I thought it was the more honest choice." Chief Okonkwo considered this. He was a man who had spent 40 years building an image of himself in Lagos, and a significant portion of that image involved his ability to identify serious men quickly and accurately. He was now standing beside a man he had failed to identify correctly, which was the kind of information that required time to process. He said, "Your mother is here?" Emeka said, "She is. She came by car. I would not ask her to arrive any other way." Chief Okonkwo made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but had its shape. He said, "I would like to meet her." Emeka said, "After the cake." They cut the cake. Emeka introduced his mother, Mama Chioma, small, dignified, in a simple but well-chosen ankara, greeted Chief Okonkwo with the composure of a woman who had already decided she was not going to be intimidated by embroidered agbada, and who had earned that decision over 18 years of pre-dawn mornings and newspaper-wrapped akara. Chief Okonkwo greeted her with a respect that had not been in his face that morning. Both of them understood what had changed, and neither of them named it, which was the most respectful possible way for such a conversation to end. Auntie Ngozi came to Emeka late in the afternoon, after the dancing had started, and the room had become the warm, unself-conscious thing that Lagos receptions always become given enough time and a properly catered buffet. She did not approach him with apology prepared in her expression. She was not built for that kind of approach, and they both knew it. She came with the stiffness of a woman walking toward something that needed to be done, arranged precisely as the thing it was. She said, "Emeka." He said, "Auntie." She said, "I made a remark this morning. Outside the church." He said, "You did." She said, "About a delivery man." He said, "Yes." She said, "I was wrong." He said, "You are not wrong about the scooter, Auntie. The scooter is exactly what it appears to be. You are wrong about what the scooter means." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What does it mean?" He said, "It means I came from somewhere real. And I chose not to hide that on the most public day of my life." He paused. "Your niece married someone who knows the difference between the arrival and the journey. That is the thing I wanted people to see." Auntie Ngozi held his gaze. Something in her face moved. Not warmth exactly, not yet, but the early motion toward it, the expression of a person who has encountered someone more precise than they expected and has adjusted their estimate accordingly. She said, "Your mother must be a remarkable woman." He said, "She is the most remarkable person I know." Auntie Ngozi nodded. She picked up her drink. She returned to her table. She did not become a different person that afternoon. People rarely do. But something had shifted, and Amara, watching from across the room, saw the shift happen, and felt something settle in her that had been quietly unsettled since the morning her father's jaw had tightened at the sight of a scooter on a Lekki street. Emeka gave one interview a week later to a journalist who asked why he had ridden a scooter to his own wedding when he could have arrived in something worth more than most people's annual income. He said, "Because I wanted the first thing people saw on my wedding day to be true. The cars come later. The truth comes first." The quote was shared 40,000 times in 48 hours. Auntie Ngozi shared it on the third day with a caption that read, "My niece's husband." She added nothing else. She did not need to. The scooter sits in Emeka's garage today, cleaned weekly by the gateman who has been instructed to maintain it without being told why. Amara asked him once whether he would ever ride it again. He said, "When our son is old enough to understand why it matters." She said, "We don't have a son yet." He said, "We have time." She looked at him the way she had looked at him when she walked out of the church doorway and down the steps and stood beside him in front of everyone who was laughing. The same look. The one that said she had made her decision and was not interested in the opinion of anyone who had made theirs based on a vehicle. She had not needed to stand beside him that morning. She had chosen to. He had not needed to arrive on a scooter. He had chosen to. In Lagos, where everything is performance and image and association, the most radical act two people can perform together is to choose the true thing when the impressive thing is equally available. Amara chose the man before she knew the full extent of what he had built. She chose him over dinner conversations about his mother and his algorithm, and the gap between how African startups talked to investors and how they actually operated. She chose him the way you choose something that fits, without needing to justify the fit to anyone who cannot feel it. Emeka chose the scooter when the car was available because the scooter was where he came from, and he was not willing to arrive at the most important morning of his life pretending otherwise. And the people who laughed, they received something better than they expected. Not just a wealthy addition to the family. A man who understood that wealth without memory is just a number, and that the scooter parked outside the church was not a failure to arrive properly. It was proof that he remembered the morning he had arrived on the back of Malam Sul's Okada, heading toward his future, with nothing in his pocket, and everything ahead of him. He had arrived the same way on his wedding morning. The circumstances had changed. The man had not. If this story moves something in you, tell us in the comments. Have you ever been judged by someone who had only seen the surface? Tell us where you're watching from. Subscribe to Visa's Tales. Share this with someone who has ever been underestimated by people who only knew how to read the vehicle. Because the most honest thing about a man is not what he drives when the world is watching. It is what he chooses when he could choose anything. And what he chooses tells you everything.